It's 3 o'clock and your phone's ringing. It's waking you up out of bed. You look at it, you realize the caller ID is work. Why would work be calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning? There's a good possibility there's an emergency. Quite possibly it's a disaster at one of your locations. If you're in management, you probably need to be implementing your disaster recovery plan or whatever plan you have in place to deal with an emergency of the type that you're being contacted about. Do you have that? Is it working? Well, I've been in IT for the last 12 years. 5 of it's been in IT management, and also I come from Central Florida. I just recently relocated to Atlanta 5 years ago, so the majority of my IT experience has been in Central Florida, Hurricane Alley. So it was pretty much a yearly exercise. We would be responding to one disaster or potential disaster in a short period of time. I've been in companies that had disaster plans. I've been in companies that haven't had disaster plans. I've been in companies that were in the process of implementing them while the disaster was coming. I can say one thing. If you do not have a plan in place, things will not go nearly as smoothly as you hope. So, that said, we can look at many examples in history, both recent and going back even as far as the Titanic is an example that I want to talk to you about tonight. Mr. Mark Kazak-Holland wrote a very interesting book called Online, On Time, On Budget, Titanic Lessons for the E-Business Executive. It really goes to tell you about a situation that we're all familiar with. I think just about everyone has heard of the story of the Titanic. It's become a catchphrase even for Titanic failures, and he gives it a critical eye, showing what went wrong, what could have been done to help alleviate some of the issues. Focusing on the disaster portion of the issue, we can go back. This began well before the actual accident occurred. There were cost-cutting measures. There were changes made to the architect's design of the Titanic that really rendered the unsinkable ship, the Titanic, much less so. If it had been implemented as exactly as the architect written, we probably wouldn't be talking about this right now. That being the case, many little changes added up to a large failure in the system at the end. Not only were there cost-cutting measures at the beginning, but there were simple changes made for aesthetic's sake. The ship sailed with 20 lifeboats versus 32, simply to clear up some space on the deck of the ship because it was too cluttered with those additional lifeboats on there. The passengers, because many of them were very wealthy paying patrons, were never drilled in the use of these lifeboats. The crew never drilled with them to practice, so the passengers didn't know where to go in the event of an emergency. So when the abandoned ship was actually sounded, a lot of passengers didn't know what that was, and even the ones that didn't know where to go. So we come then to the issue of that comes down to poor planning. They had some plans in place. There were some things the captain was supposed to do in the event of an emergency. He didn't follow these. One of them being they were supposed to assess the ship before they moved on in the event of striking ice, another ship, or any type of accident in that case. Rather than doing that, he immediately wanted to sail on and head to port because this was a very visible cruise. So that decision of itself, a lot of experts feel, caused the ship to sink in such a rapid fashion rather than allowing time for other cruise liners to get nearby and provide assistance. So when we have all these things come together, when we have cost cuts, failure to enact plans, failure to put plans in place, failure to enact those that we do, we can really have some catastrophic problems. So in our daily lives, we have things that, while not on this magnitude, we can have some effect on. There are constantly disasters threatening various places around our country, various businesses, whether due to man-made or natural causes, and we truly need to have plans in place to help mitigate this disaster. If we start at the foundation, if we start at the building blocks of, using IT as an example, if we start at the building blocks and the foundations, Ronald Bowman wrote a good book called Business Continuity Planning for Data Centers and Systems, a Strategic Implementation Guide. Strategy. That's what he discusses in the book. The strategy of building out your data center, building out your business's backbone so that it is redundant, so that it has all of the necessary pieces to function. If one or more pieces are gone, you can still operate your business. You really should plan your data center in a location that minimizes risk, has multiple paths of access to the data center, that has multiple ISPs and multiple methods of getting power in there, whether it be battery or UPS generation, all that. When you have this solid building block, then you can move on to scaling that out to more locations, because the term having all your eggs in one basket, that applies here. You really want to have multiple distributed locations around the U.S. or internationally if your business allows for that. Kenneth Myers speaks in his book, Business Continuity Strategies, Protecting Against Unplanned Disasters, about these things. Again, we're discussing strategies. There's a lot of things that you need to put into play. You need to plan, you need to implement, you need to test, you need to revise. These simple building blocks all come together to give you a plan of action that you can perform in a disaster. The true need for planning comes out when the disaster is there. If you haven't done it prior, you're going to really have some issues. And you need to have it done and documented in such a fashion that everybody knows where the lines of responsibility are, everyone knows the action they need to perform, and it needs to be laid out in the simplest fashion that is feasible. All the contingencies that you can think of need to be covered. They need to be covered in depth enough to resolve the issue, but they need to be made as simple as possible. A quote comes to mind from Albert Einstein that he gave in a speech on theoretical physics one time. Make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. It really sums up how you need to approach making a disaster recovery plan. It needs to be simple, but it needs to be comprehensive. So if we start with a solid foundation, we build this up, we plan for the disaster, we put a simple, repeatable platform in place, we test it, we implement it, we retest it, what can we expect? Well, hopefully we would have some results like a securities company in Europe called Euroclear had. They were implementing a financial business continuity plan in conjunction with Business Continuity Partnership in Europe. They helped lay out disaster plans for larger companies like this. They had helped Euroclear establish a IT infrastructure plan that Euroclear liked so much. They saw how well it was protecting them from the various man-made and natural disasters that occur, that they decided to implement it for financial disasters as well. So they implement this, they test it, they plan it, they review their testing, they feel that they are safe and everything is covered. 2 months later, in September of 2008, Lehman Brothers fails. I think most people have heard of this one. It was a large collapse in Europe, and it cost people billions of dollars. Euroclear was a major securities holder for Lehman Brothers, but they had mitigated their risk. Even though the majority of upper executives were almost unreachable, they were off-site at a conference, they were able, because they had a plan in place, to implement the plan, follow the steps, and mitigated the risk associated with Lehman Brothers' failure. They really had very, very minor losses comparatively to companies who did not implement a plan such as this. So with proper planning, proper testing, and proper implementation, things go well. So what can we do to plan for these kind of disasters? Well, first off, you need to understand where your exposure lies. We need to plan for as many disasters as we can possibly think of, because there will be some we don't think of, so the more we can plan for, the better. And once we've planned for them, we must implement the plan, test the plan, revisit the plan, and test again. You must constantly test these plans over and over again as your business and business requirements change. Now, not everyone in the audience here is responsible for this. Probably many of you are not, but you know who may be at your company. If you don't, you can find out. I would strongly suggest you take this information. If you need it, start to implement this type of disaster plan. If you're not the person responsible for it, take it to the person who is. I know that I sleep much better at night knowing that my company is protected by a disaster recovery plan, and should we lose one of our facilities for any length of time, we will still continue business. Do you know the same?